I'm Randy Bartlett. We are here in the SoFA conference room, and we're with Kailee Lefebvre from the Coconut Rhinoceros Beetle response at HDOA, and she is going to give us a 5-year status update on what they've been up to and where they're at now. And we've got about 9 people on the line, but or 10, and we got a few people here in the room. But we'll just skip introductions and get going with Kailee. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Happy Aloha Friday, everyone. So how are we going to do the, I have a lot of animations on this. Is this going to work if we...
Should.
Let's see. Okay. I guess did the trap disappear? Anyone?
Yeah. Oh.
On your side?
Sorry.
Because it was really delayed. So.
Yeah. No, the trap's still there.
Okay, it's going to be really delayed. So listen to the sound of my voice, and then eventually things will pop up. Okay. So I'm going to talk about what's been going on. We are now actually moving into technically our 6th year running. So it started back in December of 2013, so we're going on still strong. And so I'm going to start off with a kind of a general overview of trap finds, what we've been doing in certain zones, and then I'll move on into some outreach very lightly, but mostly some of our ongoing and upcoming projects a little bit towards the end. So our first map here, we're going to be taking a look at the red diamonds are going to represent the traps that have caught at some point within the last 6 months. Now, this map was made back in the middle-ish of March, so just keep that in mind. It's pretty relevant, though, even though we're about a month and a half later. The yellow diamonds are going to show everything that a trap that has caught at some point from the beginning up until that the 6 months prior. So that's all the things that have happened in the past. So we're really focusing on the reds. All the rest of the little black dotties are traps that have never caught a beetle. Okay, so other than that, there's a nice little graph towards the top right of the picture. So, I mean, overall, we can just gather that the trap catches are slightly increasing, pretty much. And we can definitely attribute that increase to a lot of the breeding sites and mitigation projects that have been happening mainly in the Pearl City Peninsula area. So I'll go into a little bit more detail about that, but pretty much most fluctuations within that trend line. So we're only looking at trap catches because that kind of gives us the easiest idea of what's happening with the population overall. So most of the fluctuations that you'll see is usually due to mitigation of breeding sites. So when we find a big breeding site, we can get rid of a lot of the population, obviously, and usually we see a decrease in trap detections. Unfortunately, right now we have a lot of both trap finds and detections and breeding sites going on at the same time. So hopefully, is the presentation kind of keeping up with me? I'm trying to push buttons before I start talking. Anyone? Okay, I'm going to keep going. So Pearl City Peninsula. On my map, it gets a sad face emoji because it is definitely our hot spot. Now we're probably been focusing on this area for about 1.5 to 2 years now since the first beetles and breeding sites have been found, particularly in the Waiava area, has been kind of going strong currently. What we are doing good at is we have a lot of good communication, cooperation, and outreach going on in this with the landowners and the lessees in this area. There's some pretty major landowners. We're talking about UH, LCC, Kamehameha Schools, as well as the Navy. So they are all kind of full force going as we like. We have major mitigation strategies going on in this area right now, but we continue to find breeding sites, which is posing to be more difficult to mitigate for the main reason being that a lot of this material is now broken down into fine compost material. So typically our program likes to burn material because that is going to be the best way, most efficient, and for sure way that beetles are not going to be breeding in that material. But if you know anything about burning compost, it's not very easy to do. So we're having issues with trying to sanitize this fine material. Even their beetles are going into straight red dirt, which that is also very difficult to sanitize. So even dealing with the transport and disposal of all this material is posing to be kind of a challenge. So one thing that I will mention a little bit later too, one of the upcoming projects that we're doing is we're going to be bringing in a vacuum steam sterilization unit. It's a pretty big, expensive rig that will be able to process this kind of material, so it's very important. So that's going to be coming up hopefully in the future this year. So the other challenge that we're faced with in this area is that a lot of the landowners and lessees actually have uses for compost and mulch, so they don't want to just get rid of all of that. Some of the landowners are engaged in restoration projects as well as grant-funded composting projects. Especially the college, they actually require compost and mulch in this area. So we're trying our best to be able to work with them in order to give them sanitized material, use it a little bit safer, and continue to do what they need to do with their projects. So the other major hotspot that we have, and this has been an area that we focused on since the beginning of the program, is Iroquois Point and Eva Beach. Now, some of the things that we are doing good at in this area is still the same as Pearl City, actually. We have good communication, cooperation, and outreach. Outreach particularly with, so it's going to be kind of grassroots with the residents in the area on like Eva Beach Road, although when we're looking at Capilina Homes, so that's more of a mostly military residential housing. But the community there is really great at providing their residents information, although they do get high turnover, but they have included us in many of their community events, which has been really great. So we have different challenges here, though. We actually are having a difficult time, continuing to have a difficult time finding breeding sites, and that is mostly because they manicure and landscape this area, and there is no obvious compost piles or decomposing plant matter, which is the typical stuff that we would find beetles in. So we are still kind of unsure of exactly where the beetles are coming from. We've done endless amounts of breeding site surveys. It is possible that they are under turf, which is scary, although we could use pesticides in the future for that. So that's what we're dealing with at Iroquois Point. It seems like recently we've been getting smaller beetles from this area, which would indicate possibly that they're running out of good breeding sites. So that's hopeful, but our numbers are still pretty high. All right. Other than that, Central Oahu has been more of a recent development. So Central Oahu, we're talking mostly Waikele, Mililani Agricultural Park, and Kunia Aglands area. So this we attribute almost definitely to be transport by humans and more than likely landscapers. So, all this area, well, except for the Waikele, but all this area, the Mililani Ag Park, Kunia, they take in loads and loads of mulch, and pretty much from around the entire island. So one of the things that we need to be focusing on more in the future and moving on is it seems like there's really a trend that unfortunately the landscapers are probably the ones that can be linked to why we get all these new hits and populations in certain areas. Nanakuli was an agricultural area. Waimanalo agricultural, and all these areas right in Central Oahu are all agricultural. So we're starting to definitely see that it's most likely that it's being transported by landscapers. Waipio Peninsula, it does look a little bit scary that there are a lot of traps that seem to be hitting in this area, although it's kind of scattered. So we don't get clusters like how we do in the Pearl City Peninsula area. So we're kind of assuming that this is probably due to trade wind travel or kind of just a natural migration from Pearl City Peninsula. So hopefully that continues. There's not too much that the beetles eat or feed on in the Waipio Peninsula, so hopefully that can explain why we're getting those hits there. But on the lighter side of things, we do still continue to have really good, seemingly success in, we call it kind of the Pearl Harbor East area. So it's pretty much everything from the Fort Cam housing point of Pearl Harbor, Ford Island, everything east of that, which used to have, Ground Zero, Mamala Bay, Navy Marine Golf Course had a major population, and just strewn throughout, Joint Base Pearl Harbor property used to have a lot of beetles. And this year, I just got the numbers. It's actually a part of the HISC newsletter. We caught 4 beetles on the very tip of the Fort Cam housing area, which we're assuming is coming over from the Iroquois Point side. So it seems like we are almost out of the clear for almost all of Joint Base East, which is really great. So even Nanakuli area, Nanakuli, Maili, and Waianae, that is going on 2.5 years of having no beetles, no damage, never found a breeding site on that side of the island, so we're looking really, really good. And that would the first eradication once we get to 3 years. So we're only a few months out from that. Good question? Mm-hmm.
This is Stephanie here. I just like those of us on the web meeting, I think we can only see the first slide, just FYI. Maybe you could share the presentation afterwards on Google Groups or something.
Of course.
Yeah, sorry about that. I'll make sure to put a link to the PowerPoint on the HISC website.
Okay, that'll work.
So for Nanakuli, since you didn't find a breeding site, does that mean you did a localized eradication by trapping out the population?
Because the population was there for about 2 years, we've seen it almost definitely had some kind of a breeding population. We just never were to find it, and so maybe it was purely just that it was way too dry and desolate on that side. they also have clusters of trees, but really not that much palms to go off of. So we're not exactly sure is the short answer. Yeah. But like to think that it involved a lot of the community out there too, right? That we knocked on every door. So them allowing us to put up traps in all of their properties and survey constantly. Maybe it was the disruption of a lot of the material, and I'm make it out there. Yeah. Okay, so other than that, really lightly, some of the outreach that's been going on recently, we've been doing a lot of school presentations and engaging with a lot of the businesses in our hot zones, as always. Just some things. We are going to have a backyard gardening expo that we're teaming up with Learning Center, OS, even Home Depot, and the university and HDOA, of course. It's going to be more centered around just general backyard gardening. We're going to have some workshops with composting, so we're going to be teaching people how to utilize and to hopefully sanitize their compost, and so it'll be a little bit safer when they do go searching and using their material. So we're going to be also having a plant sale and things like that, so fun. So it's going to be at the Urban Garden Center next weekend, 8:30 to 11:30. You can let me know if you want to see that flyer, or we're going to be sharing that, so I can pass out that flyer as well. So that's pretty much it. So now we're going to move on to our ongoing research and upcoming projects. So some of the things that have been ongoing is tree injection. There we go. So we have some tree injections that's been worked on for the past, 3-4 years now. So they're using the acephate and imidacloprid, both pesticides that the city already uses, so it's not something that is brand new. But we would like to expand that, and those are still, they're still collecting some data also from that experiment. Fungus, same fungus that we're dealing with, the metarhizium, the one that is actually found here as well. We're starting to do some field testing, so we're inoculating mulch piles with this fungus, seeing moderate mortality with that, so it's not going to be a kill-all for sure, but it's just one of the things that we have in our back pockets. So also, this may seem pretty obvious, but with turf pesticides, we've had some pesticides in the past that have been tested really early on, but our lab folks wanted to just see if the ones that are not prescribed for CRB but are just found off the shelf would work too. So it's looking that a couple of them are showing pretty decent results, particularly the Bayer and 7. So those are granular pesticides for turf and lawns, and they say that they'll go after, it'll kill like Japanese beetles and other white grubs. So we can definitely start saying that these are being tested, and that homeowners could just go off to the store and buy some of these if they want to use that in their mulch or in their lawns, just in case. So other than that, a little bit of light trials are going on. So they're testing the wavelength. So they've identified that these beetles can see everything from ultraviolet to green. So now they're actually just testing what the reaction is to those colors and wavelengths. So that should be interesting to see exactly what if it's repellent, or if they're attracted, or if it makes them happy or sad. So they're going into that kind of experimenting now. We also have a couple of new lures that have been developed, phenol and quinone. Don't ask me too much about what exactly that means. I know it's probably the collected from the guts of the beetles. And so they're currently doing some field testing with that as well, or planning to. Another big one, which is what I mentioned earlier, the vacuum steam sterilization unit. This is not exactly what it's going to look like. This is just a sample picture, but it's going to be one of the ways that we are going to be able to sanitize that fine compost material. So this is going to be really key for us in our hottest zones. So hopefully we're looking at October, hopefully definitely by the end of the year. Doggies. So we are slated to get a dog program, hopefully by the end of September or so. They are going to be so helpful in helping us to find breeding sites, especially, like I mentioned, if in the event that they are in turf. Obviously, there's going to be only a couple of ways that we can survey turf, and hopefully the dogs will be able to help us to really hone in on where we need to be looking at or treat or survey. So, other than that, there is another project with RNAi. So that is going to cause a disruption within their genes, and so currently they're able to inject the beetles physically with this, although they're working on better delivery mechanisms, so to be able to disperse it, as to a lot of beetles at a time, of course.
How is that regulated? Did I not ask?
That's not a question for me. I wouldn't be able to answer that. I'm sorry. That's definitely a Darcy question. Does anybody else know? No clue. Okay.
No, the RNA injection thing. I don't know that much about it, but it might just be regulated by insecticide. But it is kind of a genetic tool.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to end off with some of the programmatic needs that we still see. A green waste management plan is always our pie in the sky that somehow we can manage to get, especially, of course, the landscapers to move things around either a lot more safe or that they just can't take material from our hot zones. Whatever that's going to exactly look like, we need something that's going to be island-wide and enforceable as well. So, otherwise, we would always need more mitigation tools, like I mentioned about our vacuum steam sterilization. That's one way to do it. Although we're always going to need to be able to find new tools to tackle a huge pile, like is such on the screen, which you'll be able to see later. But there's a lot of material out there for us to sanitize in the future if it does continue to spread. So otherwise, we're always trying to build relationships and all of our partner agencies. So we really appreciate anybody who wants to reach out to us and just gather information or help us out in both ways. And especially, once again, just touching on the fact that it is probably the landscaping industry that we really need to get more meaningful interactions, because we can tell them all day what the potential is for this beetle and, the fact that it is possible that they are spreading it. But at the end of the day, from what I've seen out of years, is that they, and rightfully so, they do things at their convenience and the way that it's going to be most economical for them. So that's definitely going to be our biggest threat moving forward. So that's why if anybody has any, opinions and great ideas on how to make sure that they hopefully can, really get the idea that they are going to be our line of defense and potentially, the opposite. So that is all that I have for the updates.